of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. So glad to be back with you live for another journey through the news and headlines of our time, guided by personhood principles. That means we take care of humans neighbor to neighbor. We don't look at D.C. for guidance and the meaning of life every 2 or 4 years. Who's going to have the power in D.C.? That doesn't determine how we process our world. We look at things that we can actually touch and see and affect. Things relatively in our jurisdiction, our control. And D.C. is out of control. It's a lawless place, a place of anarchists. And it's not a place of sanity. It's not a place that you can find hope and meaning in. Even if you have your favorite guys running the show there, it's a deep bureaucracy that has lost its, measure of authority that it was supposed to be contained in the Constitution. And the Constitution did not imagine the labyrinthine bureaucracies in the executive branch today. The president was supposed to execute the law, not how many people, millions of employees today. That wasn't what they intended. With all their little jurisdictions and all their little can't fire this guy and can't do this. And you look at Fauci, for example. You think the founders intended to have some mad scientist like that who's got patents with big pharmaceutical companies and has been spending his entire life creating sensationalism about drugs to help benefit patented new medicine? You think that's what they intended when they said that the president would execute the laws of the land, that somehow that kind of a guy makes more money than the president would be running such asinine, lawless policies and things? Of course not, right? But that's where we're at. And it's because we have betrayed all of our founding principles in this time. We've betrayed them because we don't understand that all of the problems we have are a worldview issue. We worship people made in our own image, and that means we worship people who have might makes right as their driving animation for what they do, the choices they make. That's what drives them. So when you look at the headlines here today, I set the table with that statement because look at the headlines here. Kremlin propaganda declares World War III has started, Daily Star reports. Now, Daily Star, a little bit sensational, but that's where things are headed, it seems. Propaganda from a Russian TV show has claimed that the war in Ukraine is over and that the new goal of Russian forces is to demilitarize NATO, with a news anchor saying a real war has started. The Russian television anchor Olga Skyabayev of Putin mouthpiece Rossiya 1 claimed on camera that the war in Ukraine, known in Russia as a special military operation, is now over. She argued that the West's provisions of arms to Ukraine meant that the special operation had spilled over into a global conflict as Ukraine showcased new British Wolfhound heavy tactical support vehicles. The anchor's tirade was broadcast where she claimed Russia was being forced to demilitarize both Ukraine and NATO. It's time to admit, perhaps, that Russia's special operation in Ukraine is now over in the sense that a real war has started. World War III. We are being forced to demilitarize not just Ukraine, but NATO as a whole. With that kind of hot rhetoric, if it's going to continue to get, mimicked on the other side, as it has been, of, we need to take them out, we need to have regime change, we need to do this, we need to assassinate, with nuclear weapons on both sides, that's a terrible place to be. It's a terrible place to be dancing around carelessly for no reason around. The Sun has another story about this issue. There's a threat. Russia threatens to wipe out the entire U.S. with just 4 Satan II missiles in chilling warning over Ukraine. The politician Alexei Zurevlev was joined on the talk show by MP and Russia's state mouthpiece Yevgeny Popov, the host of the Rossiya 1 channel show. The lawmaker claimed that 2 of Russia's Sarmat Satan II missiles would destroy the entirety of America's East Coast, before adding it would take just 2 missiles for the West Coast as well. 4 missiles and there will be nothing left. They think the mushroom cloud will be taller than a high-rise. That mushroom cloud will be visible from Mexico, said Zervlev. So the rhetoric is heating up. Aggression, antisocial attitudes are heating up between the West and Russia, it appears. Or maybe it's a head fake. Who knows with these information war games that are always going on. Standing at the colossal height of a 14-story tower block, the 208-ton RS-28 Sarmat missile, also known as the Satan II, is capable of striking targets at almost 16,000 miles per hour. The world-ending nuke can also carry 15 warheads and has the potential to obliterate an area the size of the UK in a single blast. Putin cronies have claimed the Russian military could have as many as 50 of these missiles in their arsenal, and have even bizarrely threatened to use them to drown the UK in a radioactive tsunami. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has also said that his Satan II missiles can break through all modern anti-missile defenses. Again, if we had people with sanity, we would be able to resolve these things before they get to this point of overheated rhetoric. But we don't, because we have not learned our lessons. We continue to prop up people who want to play God, and that includes people in Russia. But that's not our culture that I'm coming from, so I'm going to speak about what I know in my own backyard and deal with what I have in my own cultural framework. But we continue to look to human beings to be gods, to play God, to sacrifice the right amount of people, the right certain people, and somehow that will make a better tomorrow. But sacrifice of another does not work in light of the revelation of the cross that says to take up your own cross rather than to crucify your neighbor. That is in direct contradiction from what we see in world affairs today, with the leaders of the world powers continually saying, no, actually, we'll go ahead and sacrifice another to make the world run. You know, that reminds me of people telling me, well, we can't imitate Jesus because our culture is in such a state of war with globalists or leftists or whatever, that we have to get to a point where we can use, whatever necessary to get power. Right? So they say, don't imitate Jesus. We're in a time of war. You don't have time to love your neighbor as yourself. We don't have time to be, turn the other cheek and all these things. Because this is fight or flight. We got to go. The nihilists or the globalists or the authoritarians or whatever the other is that people identify as the big problem in our culture. They're just too vicious. They're too nasty. We cannot do this Jesus stuff right now. And that's what people who are Christians tell me. They, especially the Christians, are the ones that tell me that line. When I think about it, I say Jesus was in a state of war his whole life. He was always in a state of war. He was in military occupation. He had different factions warring for power. People's lives were at stake. People were in harm's way. And everything he did was in a state of war with evil of all sides coming at him from different ways. So his life actions, his choices were actually what you do when you're in the midst of dire conflict. That's actually how you survive and thrive in the midst of conflict, is to understand his social Aikido. We'll be back on A Neighbor's Choice. Waking up to the reality, the mainstream corporate press is making headlines saying, yeah, it's pretty tough, pretty bad thing going on in Ukraine. And it's sick because they propped up this fantasy that, oh, they can win this war. Let's arm them to the teeth. Let's let every Ukrainian die for our proxy war, and we'll propagandize our low info audiences in America and UK and everywhere else. And we'll create this fantasy that this can be won with a little bit more grit and a little bit more military-industrial profits. And then it doesn't happen, and then they have to come up with an excuse as to why their lies are catching up and the reality is coming out. And none of this needed to happen if they had sober, intelligent, strategically empathetic people who knew how to say, okay, how are our actions going to be perceived if the shoe was on the other foot? If we can look at the things that we're doing with NATO in that region, when Russia was asking to be a part of NATO at one point, why didn't we consider that? Why is it, Turkey is a part of NATO, but Russia isn't? Why? Does Turkey have a culture that's more closer to DC's interest than Russia's culture, or what? What's the deal there, huh? But you can't ask those questions in the dumb, low-info frame of thinking from the outdated TV party. You have to think with a dumb frame that they give you. That's your only choice if you want to think in their ways. It's not a healthy place to think, but that's where most people are. Daily Mail says, sperm donor with incurable condition that leads to low IQ who fathered 15 children to lesbian mothers and then fought them for parental access is unmasked by judge to stop more women responding to his online ads. So, James McDougall is this guy. He's got an incurable genetic condition. He's 37, and he's fathered 15 children to lesbian women through private donations. And this is in UK. He suffered from Fragile X syndrome, an incurable inheritable condition that leads to low IQ. Mr. McDougall applied for access to the children, but a judge rejected his request over fears of harm to the children. So you hear a lot of these stories of people, these horror stories of you say this Netflix show came out about our father, and this guy had like 96 kids, and it was not supposed to be his stuff. It was supposed to be somebody else's stuff, but he was the doctor and he wanted to experiment. Why are these stories coming out all of a sudden? People are hungry for true identity. They want to know who they are. Who am I? Where did I come from? And what am I supposed to be here for? What is it that I'm supposed to do? And those questions remain unanswered, and it's no wonder that people turn to nihilism, Epicureanism, things like that to numb out from those questions that remain fundamentally unanswered in their hearts. Who am I? Why am I here? Why am I on this earth? What does it mean to be human? How am I supposed to interact with culture? So many of the people that are insane, or we consider insane, that go into these terrible murderous sprees like in mass shootings, so many of them are wrestling with these questions. As C.S. Lewis said, the madman is not someone who has lost his reason. The madman is someone who has lost everything but his reason. Because in their twisted worldview of nihilism, they reason their way to a terrible, terrible, wicked, awful solution, right? Because reason is what drives so much of this kind of thinking, and it leads people into these kind of conclusions that are fundamentally despair-driven and despairing and hateful of humans, hateful of culture, right? And that's what happens when we have rejected any notions of joy and wonder and playfulness and thanks and gratitude, all these allegedly old-fashioned dispositions. We're supposed to be above that. Oh, we're cynical, we're mature, we're busy, we're, hardworking, aspirational, career-driven people. We don't have time for wonder and gratitude and joy, right? And playfulness and those different things. Jesus said that the kingdom of God is of children. It's like children, the way they think. And they have, if given a proper, healthy environment to flourish, they have those dispositions more naturally. They have those dispositions. And then we in society kind of can mess that up, right? We talk people out of joy. We talk people out of wonder. We talk people out of passion for things. You're not supposed to be passionate about anything. You're supposed to be above it all. You know, you're supposed to be too cool for school. You know, they used to say, you're just not cool. You know, if you're considered to be fashionable, trendy, you're not supposed to be earnest. You're not supposed to have big dreams and believe in things. You're supposed to believe in nothing. And that's supposedly liberating. It's not liberating. It's entrapping. It enslaves you to your passions. It enslaves you to your reason that leads you down dark paths. All of these things come back to identity. Who are we? Right? And people are wanting to know these questions, and you're seeing stories pop up more and more and more that wrestle and reflect those questions being asked in our time. Why are we here? And we need to be able to embrace those questions. We need to be able to lean into the mystery rather than running from it and numbing out. We shouldn't be afraid of those tough questions that can't give us quick solutions and answers. We should lean into those paradoxes of life, because that is a culture that will create life in abundance. That's a culture that will create people to be courageous, to do great things, to do good things, even when the reward seems very low. You know, being able to have a selflessness, being able to have a self-emptying disposition, willing to lay down your life for a friend. Many people experience that thought. They thought about the courage that it takes to lay down one's life for a friend in Memorial Day, because that's a common thing people say in America in Memorial Day about laying down your life for another. And the true ultimate manifestation of that theme is to lay one's life down in the pursuit of a nonviolent resistance to evil, to lay one's life down in nonviolence and peace, rather than, well, you know, like a suicide terrorist blows up a village, but he kills himself with it. And that kind of twisted laying down one's life with violence still is not what we're talking about when we talk about the vision of the personhood revolution of Jesus. So that's the kind of thing that inspires wonder. That's the kind of thing that inspires mystery and aspiration and wonder. These things, when I say wonder, what does that mean? It means being able to enjoy the mystery of the world, to see the charisma of life itself, and to find it even when things seem bleak, and to find it even when things seem boring or pointless or meaningless, to delight in the details of the moments that we have in this life, to collect moments, not things. These are the kind of attitudes that will build a culture that will be worth passing down to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on and so forth. But that's a far cry from the dominant culture we see spewed out on social media, in some cases, and TV. That's a culture that's all about me, and blame games and whipping up people into crowd passions to shame and cancel people, looking for any error in your neighbor so that you can plunge the purging dagger into their heart and cast them out of their job, or cast them out of their TV deal, or cast them out of their stature in your social network. All this ugly desire to cast out and blame and scapegoat, that is nothing new. It's just been unleashed because we have abandoned the path out of that nihilism, which is the childlike kingdom that Jesus invites us to. That's why he says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It's very light to have that lightness of being that children have. But it takes a lot of kind of discipline and exercise to lean back into that wonder-driven life. Because when you are reinforced to be cynical, selfish, scapegoating, fear-driven, anxious, striving, envious, when you are inculcated in a culture that tells you to lean into those attitudes and dispositions, then the other thing seems foreign. It seems hard when you practice joyfulness in the moment of stress, or you practice playfulness in a moment of insult, right? When you try that out, it'll feel like as if you're going to a gym and working out a muscle that you've never worked out in a while or something. It's going to feel hard and difficult. It's going to feel uncomfortable. But practicing playfulness, practicing joy as a disposition is a survival mechanism. It's a way of transcending the ugliness and falling prey to that kind of self-fulfilling pattern of self-absorption, of happiness. See, I'd say joy, not happiness, because happiness is kind of fleeting and usually driven by desire and acquiring something, or acquiring a status, or acquiring something you don't have, being unhappy with what you currently have and wanting more. But joy is kind of being grateful for what you do have and looking at all the blessings that you have. That attitude, you pass that on, you're going to get rid of a lot of these ugly wars. You're going to get rid of a lot of these horrible nihilistic shootings. I mean, everyone. Neighbor's Choice Radio. I'm your host, David Gornoski. Hope you're doing well as we are live on FM and AM. We're on podcast platforms, wherever you have your favorite podcast platform. I appreciate the wonderful reviews you guys are sharing and sending on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to, Spotify. Keep them coming. That helps new people find us, and it means a lot that you would take the time and write a good review, or whatever, an honest review, whatever you have. If you don't like it, that's fine. It doesn't matter. Do what you want to do. But appreciate you guys sending in good reviews of thoughtful reviews of our work that we do at A Neighbor's Choice. Our website is aneighborschoice.com, of course, where you can put your email in and get our weekly update of our content highlights of that week. We've got so much great stuff that's online only, so you don't want to miss that if you're listening on radio. You're just going to have to go to aneighborschoice.com. Also, if you want to email us, you can do so. hello@aneighborschoice.com is the best way to reach us. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. Biden plots inflation fight with Fed chair as nation worries. So he tried to scapegoat. Remember, it's Putin's gas hike. Now they're going to it's the Fed's fault, apparently, right? So focused on relentlessly rising prices, President Joe Biden plotted inflation fighting strategy Tuesday with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, with the fate of the economy. Excuse me, I guess he's not scapegoating him, but he probably will if he has to, with the fate of the economy and his own political prospects increasingly dependent on the actions of the government's central bank. Biden hoped to demonstrate to voters that he was attuned to their worries about higher gasoline, grocery, and other prices, while still insisting an independent Fed will act free from political pressure. Remember the Fed chairman, she's the Treasury lady now, Yellen. She was saying abortion is a fundamental thing the economy needs to have. So I thought they weren't political. Apparently they're political whenever they need to be political, right? Like Biden, the Fed wants to slow inflation without knocking the U.S. economy into recession, a highly sensitive mission that is to include increasing benchmark interest rates this summer. The president said he would not attempt to direct that course, as some previous presidents have tried. My plan to address inflation starts with simple proposition. respect the Fed, respect the Fed's independence, Biden said. Yeah, well, I would prefer the old wisdom in the Fed, right? But that's a little bit too much to ask of Biden, who is a creature of the Fed-enabled empire of D.C., right? So he doesn't know anything but a Fed Reserve-driven artificial boom-bust economy. And the boom-bust economy is always marketed as an essential part of a free market, when in reality it's not. And it's always blamed on, rich people down the road, when it's a lot deeper than that. It's rich people down the road in Davos, rich people down in Wall Street, and rich people around D.C. and the bureaucrats that protect them. They're really driving so much of these boom busts that end up stripping the middle class of their wealth and redistributing it to the rich elites, and then throwing crumbs to the poor. It's like a vice grip, what we're in. A vice grip where you throw crumbs to the poor and you throw them the promise of scapegoating their enemies, and then you give the massive redistribution of the middle class to the very, very few rich elite. And then you convince the poor to hate the middle class, and you create the lower middle class. You create in them, or you stoke in them, envy for the upper middle class. That's the guys they know down the road that have a little bit bigger home. They see them as the 1%, when in reality, they're part of the middle class too. And so you create this kind of war of all against all, where everybody's striving to beat and supplant and defeat the other. Meanwhile, divided we fall, right? Divided into never-ending schism, rivalry, obsession with jealousies, obsession with keeping up with people that we want to aspire, or we feel that, I'm entitled to wealth more than that person is, or I'm entitled to a certain level of comfort that person seems to have. It's not fair. They have it. I want it. I want to beat them. I want to use the state. I want to use social media, whatever, to, punish them. And that is really not a place to be, right, for being able to be focused on what's really driving the problem. The Federal Reserve is the problem. It's one of the big essential problems of our lawless empire that has supplanted the republic that we used to be. Another story here in MSN.com. U.S. policymakers misjudged inflation threat until it was too late. Prices for just about everything Americans buy, gas, groceries, housing, cars, clothes, even TVs, have spiked in the past years. Inflation, which has been scarcely noticeable for decades, is suddenly the top concern most people have about the economy. And it all seemed to catch Washington by surprise. On July 19th, 2021, President Biden played down the risk of persistent inflation, telling reporters that price hikes are expected to be temporary. This month, Biden called reining in prices his top domestic priority. What changed? A combination of factors, including surges in the coronavirus, supply chain problems, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and a dramatic shift in consumer spending patterns, all made things more expensive. How about the state? They can never just call it out for what it is, you see? They worship the state. They will not speak ill of the state. They will only criticize certain administrators of the state and politicians that don't use the rhetoric that they believe is becoming of the messianic vision of the state that they have, to take care of us from cradle to grave, and to do so in a way that looks like it's fluffy and victim concerned. That's kind of the Mickey Mouse branding of the state that the establishment in D.C. prefers. And they don't like people like Trump, who are more blunt and direct in their rhetoric, because it reveals the ugly violence of the statecraft sausage-making apparatus that they're a part of. And they can't bear to look at the truth of who they are. And that's one of the reasons why they hated Trump so much. That's why he was such a heretic to those in D.C. who had no problem perpetually occupying people of color in Afghanistan and Egypt and Syria and all these other places that we're always meddling in, creating chaos, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, all these places, right? And they had no problem doing that because they were always talking about, well, we're doing it for social justice, we're doing it for this or that. Somehow, if you come up with victim, messianic language and rhetoric that sounds fluffy and sweet and light and beautiful and aspirational, somehow that's supposed to make the violence and the ugliness and the brutality and the selfishness and the greed and the corruption of these policies somehow okay. And that's why, that was the fundamental reason why Trump was a problem for them, is that his rhetoric did not play ball with that whole deal. He said, we should go in Iraq and take the oil. They said, no, we're going in Iraq because we're going to help them become third-wave postmodern feminists. That's why we're doing it. We don't want to steal the oil. Yeah, they'll probably rig the oil markets while they're in Iraq, sure, but you don't talk about that. You don't say that as your selling point. You see? You do those wicked things, but you say, well, we're doing this to help the children of Iraq become enlightened, egalitarian, social justice snowflakes. That's all we're doing. That's why we're here, and also to keep our friends and allies safe in the region. But it's because we want to spread the light of our true religion to them. That's why Afghanistan had those State Department bureaucrats putting on murals of George Floyd. Like, what did the people of Afghanistan have to do with that conflict? That was something that happened over here in America. But it's like a religion. They create a religion out of deifying victims of state violence and parading them around as if they're some kind of collection of martyrs that give them a sense of purpose and meaning to go out and bomb people around the world to get them to do what exactly, right? If we bomb the Afghanistan people enough, maybe they won't put knees on the back of their suspects' necks like our police do. What? Like, that's the stupid level of insanity that drives D.C. today. You know, this abusive desire to stop abuse, this abusive, coercive, vicious, violent desire to impose some kind of utopian peace. It's very bizarre. It's very disturbing. And the consequences it has for us all is very, very dire. But it's not inevitable. We have to pursue empire. We can reject and repent it and exorcise it out of our society at any time. I'm David Gornoski. You can call in at 727-587-1040. At 727-587-1040. Back after this. Everything but the state, everything but the Federal Reserve, everything but our sanctions and policies, weaponizing the dollar. See, they always lie. Oh, the coronavirus caused it. No, our lockdowns in response to the coronavirus helped to dislodge the economic foundations that we were accustomed to, with shortages and so forth as a result. They don't tell you the truth in these media pieces. These pieces of media are meant to act like they're telling you the truth while they're really selling you. They're proselytizing you. It's not what they say explicitly as sometimes as much as what they're saying implicitly, right? It's the coronavirus that caused the inflation. It's Putin invading Ukraine. Well, but we weaponized our dollar as a response to that, which has caused a lot of this stuff. We've sanctioned certain things, which contributes to inflaming. Maybe Putin's thing had a part to do with it, but it's like a cherry on top to a sundae that has been built by our own, failed elites and their mismanagement of the resources that they have confiscated from their serfs, or what they perceive to be their serfs, the American people. That's the fundamental thing that drove us to this place. But they can't tell you that, right? I mean, they can't. That's their religion. They're not going to sit there and navel gaze and introspect, because that would mean dislodging their sense of identity. The sacred is that which you don't name, you don't speak it. It's just imbued into everything you do. And the people in the media elite class, these people have a deep, deep, abiding, unspoken faith in their particular view of this messianic state, right? So military is obsessed with making sure that pregnant women can have full access to fighter pilot jets. Why? Because they're obsessed. They have a religious desire to eliminate differences between human beings. They want to make identity this kind of illusion that you can put on like clothes or something, right? That's why they're all driving towards this metaverse type thinking, right? It's all about this virtual human experience, like a Gnostic detachment from the material differences fundamental to being human in a natural and traditional way. Those things have to be viciously attacked, and the people driving the Pentagon choices are not motivated primarily with creating a fighting force that is ready, that is the best and able to defend the nation. Rather, they're interested in creating an appearance of the elimination of differences between people. And you see that egalitarian hatred for differentiation transforming everything around us. And it's very insulting and disrespectful to everybody involved with this religious imposition. West Cook News says that Oak Park and River Forest high school administrators will require teachers next school year to adjust their classroom grading scales to account for the skin color or ethnicity of its students. Huh? School board members discussed the plan called Transformative Education, Professional Development, and Grading. You know, these bureaucrats that hate differences, they've always got very long acronym names, don't they? It was presented by the Assistant Superintendent for Student Learning. In an effort to equalize test scores among racial groups, OPRF will order its teachers to exclude from their grading assessments variables it says disproportionately hurt the grades of black students. They can no longer be docked for missing class, misbehaving in school, or failing to turn in their assignments according to the plan. Traditional grading practices perpetuate inequities and intensify the opportunity gap, reads a slide in the PowerPoint deck outlining its rationale and goals. It calls for what OPRF leaders describe as competency-based grading, eliminating zeros from the gradebook, encouraging and rewarding growth over time. Teachers are being instructed how to measure student growth while keeping the school leaders' political ideology in mind. So there you go. According to the Illinois State Board of Education, 38% of OPRF sophomore students taking the Scholastic Aptitude Test failed. That's the SAT. The failure rate was 77% for black students, 49% for Hispanics, 27% for Asians, and 25% for whites. So, again, when you don't have any view of God, you don't have a God except for your own state and what you can make of it in your own self, but you're haunted by the cross, revealing all the corruptions and abuses and heightening the sound of people's suffering through history. That's what the cross helps you see. It helps you see hidden victims throughout history and in your current times. But when you're haunted by the cross, but you reject the reality of the loving and gracious God behind the world we have today, you are left with a situation that looks like this. Trying to rearrange things, using your reason. There you go again. The madman is not the one who has abandoned his reason. It's the one who's abandoned everything but the reason. They're using their reason in this twisted worldview that they are playing and operating in. Haunted by the cross, but too arrogant to recognize the reality of its call of nonviolence and peace and mercy and recognition of one's own fallen state. They can't do that. That's not what their religion wants them to accept. And so they come up with all these clever things. Oh, let's change school. School should not be about showing up on time. Oh, we got to do this. We got to do everything we can to create 100% sameness. You know, if you're too tall and other people are jealous because they're shorter than you, that's a hate crime. That's a microaggression. That's whatever. Because that's differentiation draws out a feeling of lack on the part of people who perceive what you have as something they should have. You know, I remember in high school somebody came up to me and said, "Man, if I could just have your height, I'd have it all." And I said, "Well, what about, I guess that's all I had was the height thing?" You know, or, you know, you see in something that just seems so insatiable. If I just had what you have there that I don't have, then I'd have it all. Well, if that's all he was missing, I guess I should have imitated everything he had, because he had the whole thing figured out except for that one factor. But that's how human beings are, right? And that's what this messianic state and that desire to, you know, use all of this, you know, tinkering with outcomes and using coercion, using all these different manipulative mechanisms that will fail. That's what's driving them. They are haunted by the fact that things don't turn out fair. They're haunted by the fact that hurricanes sometimes hit people and innocent people die. They're haunted by the fact that there are not going to be billionaires in every home. But all they have to do is repent and look to the true master of history, Jesus, and imitate his liberating role model to be free from that guilt, to be free from that condemnatory spirit that they operate under. And then they're able to be free to love in a light way, to love in a carefree, joyous way, and to not point the finger at some other people group for problems that occur and differences that happen and unfair things that occur in life. It's an attitude change that we have to pursue completely, a reframing of everything we see. And this takes hard work, and people don't want to do that. They don't like that. It's uncomfortable. Like I said, if you're not doing it a lot, it feels like very, very hard work. It feels very uncomfortable, very unnatural, and it will make you feel like giving up. But it's something we should pursue. It is a good work to pursue. It is a good activity. It is a good place to pursue, because that attitudinal change means everything for everything that we're worried about, everything that bothers us. If you focus on what's wrong, if you focus on what's ugly, and then you create an ugly spirit to try to solve it, all you're going to do is create more and more ugliness and more repulsion between people, repelling from one another because they're all the same. We are interested in things that are different from us. We're interested in things that seem different from us, and we become repelled by things that seem too similar or too same to us. And that's why the more the McWoke crowd wants to artificially create undifferentiation between human beings, the more it will create rivalry and resentment and repulsion between the people who are doing this drive and march towards perfect undifferentiation. So we got to go a different way, folks. I'm David Gornoski. You can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com, or call in at 727-587-1040, 727-587-1040. We're doing a new time from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, weekdays, here, live on Radio WHBO, our flagship station across Tampa Bay and Central Florida. We'll be back for hour 2, but for now, Godspeed. If you don't participate in this dirty ritual, if you don't get in the mud with us, you're the problem. We're all swimming in the mud, and if you don't get in that mud with us, you're the dirty person. That's what that voting thing is all about, really. I'm not saying not to vote. I'm just telling you that's the mindset, that collectivist mindset that's really driving the way we think about those things. You don't get dirty like me, you're the dirty one. That's projection. But that's what's driving that thinking that we aspire, that we slink to, typically. So it's not a healthy place. It's not a good place, but it's where we're at. And so we have to first acknowledge the problem, acknowledge that we have a problem before we can start to move forward with how to get out of it. So lumber's crashing, the prices, but will you be able to afford a home? Not with all the regulations involved. You know, people like BlackRock and stuff, they're not interested in fair, free markets. They're interested in rigged markets. And they're interested in patting themselves on the back that they did something socially equitable, but in reality is just screwing over everybody and making us fight each other over who's the biggest victim group of them all. That's the name of the game in D.C. We all get screwed over if you're not part of the inside crowd, and they convince us to fight each other as to who is the biggest victim group of us all. Right? Because you can spend, if you focus on that framework, you can spend a lifetime of fighting and squabbling over my group is my gender, no, my people group, no, my race, no, my this, my that. My group is the most victimized group. Your group is a sellout. Your group is the wicked one. Your group is the criminals. Your group is the bad guys. And so you spend your whole time fighting with your neighbors over that stuff. You have no opportunity in the world to truly reject the system that's making you deviate your eyes from the truth. So the system kind of feeds off of how much energy you give it in the misdirected direction, you see? Because if you're exhausted fighting over your neighbor, then you're hung up over all the drama and all the conflicts that you've accrued with your neighbor over the time, and you have no energy to spend any time with the higher order thinking to figure out the system and for what it really is. You're just utterly exhausted with all the slights that you've accrued with your neighbors and its rivals groups, you see? Because you've shifted your focus from where it needs to be. That's a disaster if you do that. But that's what keeps the machine running nice and relatively unscathed. But this new decentralized media environment of the internet is really challenging that well-oiled machine, because that well-oiled machine needs myths that we can all kind of agree on, and we're fracturing ever rapidly as we look at new data points and new perspectives that crumble fragile lies. We'll be back after this. I'm David Gornoski. Stay with us. Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm your host, David Gornoski. Hope for those in Tampa area, Largo area, storms going around, so we're hoping you're safe. Saw a little bit of that happen at the station, I'm hearing, and that is we want to make sure everybody's doing okay. Huffington Post says J.D. Vance on porn, ban it to save families. The Ohio Senate candidate told a Catholic magazine in 2021 that porn should be restricted to help an isolated generation thrive. Going beyond even the GOP's own platform, Republican Senate candidate J.D. Vance said that pornography should be banned because it's stopping Americans from getting married and starting families. I think the combination of porn, abortion, have basically created a lonely, isolated generation that isn't getting married, they're not having families, and they're actually not even totally sure how to interact with each other. Vance said in a newly unearthed interview with Crisis Magazine from August 2021. The writer spoke with Vance at a gathering for young conservatives where Vance was a keynote speaker. She wrote that after asking him his thoughts on porn and birth control and their effects on familial decline, Vance admitted he wants to outright ban pornography. So that is going to be something they're going to try to wound his campaign on, but there's a different environment. People are thinking about things in a different way. The right is starting to think about how to use power and government control for its own stated interests. The question is that going to work out the way they intend or not? Is that going to be something that is attainable, that you can use DC to ban porn in a successful way? Or is that a kind of utopian dream that, oh my goodness, this city that is so corrupt could be using its awesome might makes right power to do a good thing for families or whatever? A lot of different factors involved with banning such a thing as porn. Maybe that's a pie-in-the-sky dream? I don't know. What do you think? 727-587-1040 is the number to call to weigh in on that issue. Again, a different kind of conservative conversation has been happening on the right. And some people hate it. Some people love it because they think, hey, the right's been losing a lot because it doesn't know how to use power when it has it. Its only game is to say cut power. But it's not really true. I do think that's an incorrect assessment of the right as it has had power. The right has always expanded power, even though it used to use limited government rhetoric more forcefully. It's always been expanding government in most things, but just having kind of a corporatist beholding attitude towards corporations doing no wrong. Here's a headline that again speaks to the culture of D.C. Michael Sussman has been acquitted. D.C. jury and D.C. verdicts. This is from Technofog, the Substack. Has been following this case. He's been acquitted, and the acquittal is no surprise. This is a D.C. jury after all. In the Roger Stone case, for example, we documented how a juror lied to get on the panel. That judge didn't care. Making matters worse, the Sussman judge wrongly allowed for a woman to remain on the jury despite the fact that her daughter and Sussman's are on the same high school crew team. One can't help but think that juror had her own daughter's interests in mind, the cohesion of the crew team, sparing her of teenage drama, etc., when she reached a decision. After the verdict was announced, the jury's forewoman held court before the media and expressed her displeasure that the special counsel prosecute a false statement case. There are bigger things that affect the nation than a possible lie to the FBI. This juror was never impartial, despite her assurance to the judge. On the facts, the evidence was more than sufficient to prove Sussman's guilt. Sussman lied to then FBI General Counsel James Baker via text message in order to get a meeting to pass the Alpha Bank hoax materials to the FBI. Sussman lied again during the meeting, stating he was not there on behalf of a client in order to get the FBI to open investigation into the Trump organization's purported ties with Alpha Bank. Later, during testimony to Congress, Sussman admitted he met with Baker on behalf of a client. Billing records proved he had been working on the Alpha Bank project on behalf of the Clinton campaign. Evidence also demonstrated that Sussman billed the Clinton campaign for the thumb drives passed to Baker during the meeting. How was the Clinton campaign billed? Sussman referenced the confidential project, the Alpha Bank project. I won't say the verdict doesn't matter. Of course it matters. It would have proven that a D.C. jury can convict one of their own. It would have resulted in accountability for lying to the FBI. Not the gravest of crimes, but is still a crime. In large part, the prosecution of Sussman was hamstrung by the FBI's investigation into the Alpha Bank allegations. That goes to materiality. How can the lies be material if the FBI's investigation was so sloppy? And so it goes on. I'm not going to read the whole thing in this piece here. Where does Durham go from here? That's the real question. We already know that the investigation into Rodney Joff remains open and that Igor Danchenko faces trial this year. Whether there is more remains to be seen. So it never seems like the people in D.C. are held accountable, especially in D.C. You know, they can haul a journalist like WikiLeaks. They can bring Julian Assange into D.C. courts and seal off the media and seal off the press from seeing, seal off the public and throw them away and lock the key, throw it away. And that's it. They've got this whole little zip code thing where they're taking care of their own, and their own are there for enriching the powerful, protecting their own friends, and they don't want to get anywhere. They don't want to get anywhere away from that nice deal they've got going on, you know. And it's a sad thing. It's a sad reality that that's where we're at. Our capital doesn't seem interested in justice. It doesn't seem interested in holding its own self accountable. But it is what we have to deal with. And it's a reflection of our culture. Politicians, they are avatars and they reflect our own culture. Even if it's rigged, even if the average person may not want to go where they're going, it's still to some degree a reflection of the population. As John Adams said, you will get the government you deserve. Fox News reports that support mounts among U.S. bishops barring Pelosi from receiving communion. San Francisco Archbishop Cordileone led the charge on barring Pelosi from communion earlier this month. And so the church clearly teaches that abortion is a grave evil and that public advocacy for and support of abortion is objectively speaking such a manifest grave sin. Portland Archbishop Alexander Sample said Friday on Facebook. What Archbishop Cordileone did was actually an act of pastoral love and care for Speaker Pelosi and for all those entrusted to his pastoral care who might have been led astray by her public support of the evil of abortion. He said, that's why that archbishop did what he did was the right thing. So she is going to get furious for this. This is going to enrage her. And I think her husband's going to be walking out of the house a lot more often while this goes on. Because she does not like people putting limits on her power, does she? And she wants to have her communion and her sacrifice too. And you can't have both. You can't partake of communion, which is about ending blood sacrifice with peace, and then go out and literally make your career about stoking the fires and desires for blood sacrifice. How does that work? You know? And remind you, it's not just the unborn sacrifices that she's big on. She's also big on, you know, stoking wars of aggression, meddling in Syria, meddling in Libya, meddling in Afghanistan, meddling in Africa, where many people are sacrificed for her own selfish ambition. It's a sick day when Nancy Pelosi desires to do something she perceives to be good for the world. A lot of ugly things happen. So that husband of hers, he got a DUI. He's probably trying to, you know, drink himself to sleep at night, living with someone like that, whose whole life and worldview is just imbued in sacrifice of vulnerable people. It's nasty. Back after this. Dealer's Choice Radio is back. I'm your host, David Gornoski. It's so good to be with you as we navigate the headlines, looking for answers, looking for inspiration in a sea of madness. It's exciting to have these challenges. Just to be able to get into gas in your car is a challenge these days. Fox 5 New York says record high California average gas price surpasses $6. I mean, goodness gracious, the homeless problem is going to be surging with this. Because how can people afford their rent? They can't even afford to get their car going to get the job. So it's crazy out there. $6.13 per gallon is the average California drivers are paying, according to AAA. A lot of people are going to be turning to AA with that kind of trouble going on in the gas prices. I mean, you can't make ends meet with that kind of a rigged economy. And of course, you know, what's the elitist answers from our Biden government? Oh, well, you need to buy an electric car, not Elon Musk's car now. We can't tell you to buy that one. He's been naughty, but you need to buy an electric car, you know, $50,000, $60,000, lots of debt payments to the banks to do it. Get on it. That's what you got to do. Those of you who can't get a job because you've got vaccine mandates and all these terrible things, or maybe you're injured from the vaccine, you got COVID fog and stupor, and have a hard time focusing at work. Maybe your business is shuttered because of the lockdowns and the consolidation of wealth for a few corporations that, you know, the permanent government of D.C. always seems to do in terms of exploiting crises for their friends. But it's tough. You know, CNBC says rising gas prices and inflation top travel concerns, overtaking COVID survey finds. 69% of Americans plan to travel this summer, but rising gas prices and inflation now top their list of concerns. The national average for unleaded gas hit another new high today. So inflation and gas prices surging. How can you have an economy? How can you have a middle class when your wages are being wiped out? And what are they doing? What we just read earlier, that they're, you know, instead of teaching kids how to do things and be productive and hardworking, they're going to make new policies where they, you know, change the grading scale based on your race. What a myopic, nihilistic assault on hope, you know? In a time when people can't even afford their gas, we say, well, what about our kids? They'll figure it out. How are they going to come up? Oh, no, they're being taught to hate each other based on racial tribalism and envy and resentment and hell on earth nihilism. You know, how is that going to help anybody? But yet will you continue to send your kid to those schools? I don't know. That's your choice, right? That's the choice we all make. But there's consequences for the choices we make. And blaming other people doesn't make that go away, that reality go away. You still got to live with the choices that we make. And sometimes we still have to live with the consequences of things we didn't do. As I mentioned earlier, people said there was a tornado touching down right by the station. That harms you. That's not your choice necessarily if you couldn't get out of the way in time. So there are things that are acts of God that are out of our hands, and there are things that we make as a choice that lead to the problems that we have, regardless of where they come from. It's our attitude in response to these roadblocks and hurdles that makes the difference. John Milton's character, Lucifer, said, the mind can make a hell out of heaven, or it can make a heaven out of hell. And even the devil's right sometimes, right? You got to give the devil his due. Because that's a true statement written into that character's mouth. But your attitude can affect the outcomes of your life. If you live life burdened and beleaguered, emphasizing all the weights that are on your shoulders, you're doomed to continually go down that path of loss, negativity, failure, disappointment, grievances, right? Nursing your grievances, nursing your wounds, nursing and fixating on the wrongs done to you. It seems to me that that's where our cultural institutions want us to stay. Always fixating on who hurt us and how we're aggrieved and how we're victimized. And every time it, deals with our own guilt, it's always, offering some kind of political solution to assuage that guilt, to comfort that, and to nurse that guilt. Never takes responsibility, self-responsibility, excellence, virtue, respect for one another, love of one another as a framework for moving ahead in life. You don't ever hear that. If you do, show it to me, because I'd like to share it on the news. That'd be news. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi refuses to comment on her husband's DUI arrest. She doesn't want to talk about it. He was driving a 2021 Porsche into an intersection near the town of Yountville and was hit by a 2014 Jeep. Whew. And she don't want to talk about it. His arrest was first reported by TMZ. But we all have mistakes. We all have problems. But the difference between DC and individual choices is that DC likes to spread its mistakes and problems onto everybody else. When they rig the economy, it screws everybody over except them and their friends. That's why it's important to create a culture of responsibility and personal ownership for our choices. And understanding that we would make some of the same mistakes other people would make if given the same context as well. That kind of humility allows ourselves to not take ourselves so seriously and not to be so grieved when someone doesn't treat us the way we want to be treated. I say all these things because I think these are the kind of basic common sense tactics of thought that we need to keep in mind and practice every day to make it through these wild times. We can report on the news, but if we don't talk about how to think and how to process our attitudes and our feelings and emotions and fears and all this, then we won't be equipped to process these difficult times. There's no one easy formula. There's just timeless wisdom that we can seek to get kind of a grounding in a crazy moment. There are storms that come along. If you don't have a foundation on a rock, you're going to get blown away by the storms, right? Storms of life come at you because of choices you made years before, choices you make in a millisecond moment of confusion or anger, or choices you make that seem perfectly reasonable and right and wholesome. Sometimes things work out in a way that you get blamed for things you didn't do. Sometimes a disease comes or an accident happens that there's no real explanation for it, but it really hurts. And all those moments come in us in our life, they come at us in our life, and our choices in the moment and how we respond to them with our attitude makes all the difference. Getting that right is the big work of life. That's the foundational rock that allows you to make it through storms of life. Storms of your own doing, storms of other people's doing, and storms that are just out of everybody's hands, random acts of nature or whatever. It's how we approach those moments. It's our choice to meet those moments with a will for thanks, courage, peace, letting things that disappoint you wash through you and not cling to you and hold you down. That, I think, is what we need to practice as we meet these rocky roads that affront us, that these different moments of concern about our economic well-being, our dollar stability, our debt load, our ability to pay for the home, our ability to pay for the gas, our ability to protect our children from nihilism and stupidity and ugliness and wickedness. All those big scary things don't have to be scary with a different mindset that we practice every day. So practice it now. Because I don't think we've hit the worst of the storms we're going to have, but I also think we haven't reached the peaks of what we're possible and what we're capable of doing. So let's cultivate that attitude now in this moment we have. I'm David Gornoski. Email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. Godspeed.